I am Joseph Michelli. I'm an organizational consultant who specializes in working with customer experience and leadership. And we're here to talk about Customer Magic, which is a book about a client of mine out of Australia that is just spectacular in the way they have blown through a category.
Brilliant. And that company is?
Macquarie Technology Group.
I keep getting that right. I keep calling them Macquarie Telecom Group, but I mean that's because it's their fault because they've been called that forever. But yes,
that's right.
Macquarie
it's not
Technology
your fault for
Group.
Sure. How dare them change their name?
And deliberately, just to trip me up.
Well, I think deliberately, but because they just want to even get farther away from the telecom sector, and the world is moving, I think into the technology space much more than the telecom space. So
totally, and well,
not just for you.
No, totally. Their telecom revenue, like everybody's, is declining over time. And, public cloud revenues are growing. How did you end up working with these guys and writing this book?
It's kind of fascinating to me, too. I remember the day I got a call from David. He's the CEO of a telecom in Australia. And I didn't pick it up straight away. I was returning the call and I was thinking, this is a prank call. Like no telecom has ever called me. The next thing
with a
is
customer
like
success story.
Oh man, I'm telling you, the next thing I'm going to get, janitorial service, or I'm going to get, the waste management company calling me. I didn't know what was going on. And I had no idea they were as big or as burgeoning as they were. So it was all just mystical to me. But I remember talking to him and thinking, yeah, right. This is going to be one of those, we want to focus on the year of the customer, which I get a lot, like making me wonder what the prior year was, year of the pony. But it wasn't that at all. I mean, they had been focusing on the customer. It was their differentiator from the beginning of, the company. And they really saw that markets were, underserved and overcharged. And so their mission was to kind of attack those markets by countering, being the antidote to those things. And yeah, so I kind of, they wanted me to come down and do a presentation. They'd read my book on the new gold standard, which you and I have had the good fortune of talking about in the past. And so, yeah, there it is. Thank you for leaning right at the right time. And so they, legitimately have been studying this. They shared it throughout their organization. They were using the Net Promoter Score, all the things fundamentally that most people in their sector weren't. So I stayed in conversation with them. We chatted about things throughout the years and got down to Australia, and they were the real deal. And at some point I said, hey, you're a different kind of story than most of my books, and I would love to figure out how we can share that story more broadly. And here we are, all the way in the UK, no less.
Indeed. Well, and books not published in the UK yet. It's out in Australia because I bought a copy and had it shipped. So I have a copy by my bedside table. I'm partway through that. So that's fantastic. But you've written, as you say, you've written about Airbnb, you've got behind you Zappos, we spoke about the book that you wrote on.
Yeah, we got a few, got Ritz-Carlton, we got Starbucks, we got Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, we got Zappos. There's others hiding behind me somewhere. Yeah.
How do they stack up against?
Well, immediately they're not a household name, as evidenced by my reaction when I got the call. So I think that's a bit different. I mean, most of my books already kind of lead with the brand. So I feel like I'm pushing a little uphill on this one because not everyone knows Macquarie Technology Group. But I think what is beautiful about that is there are so many of the Macquaries in the world, companies that are really working hard and executing on behalf of their customers, and they just don't get the limelight. So I'm really trying to share a little of that. I also think that they do some things very differently than most brands. I mentioned the Net Promoter Score. Fred Reichelt, who created it, is a friend of mine. And, I talked to Fred many times while writing this book about Macquarie specifically. And, every time I would say, and they do this, he goes, yeah, it's perfect hygiene. Like it's exactly the way we would want this metric deployed. They're using it in real time. They're helping their team members understand how they can leverage in the moment interactions to drive higher NPS. They have some competition, healthy competition, great transparency. They do things really well on that front. I think they're a storytelling organization, which is very much like the Ritz-Carlton. Ritz-Carlton's rich with telling wow stories of ladies and gentlemen doing heroic and not so heroic things to make guests' life better. Macquarie has all kinds of storytelling components built into their culture. so that they can keep it alive. And I would just note on that, I mean, I think, everybody loves a good story, right? But lots of companies don't invest in the infrastructure it takes to deliver those stories consistently. It takes a machine to collect those stories and share them back into the organization, tie them to your mission, and make them come alive. And so they've invested in that and done a marvelous job with it. And bottom line, they're growing like weeds. I mean, they are just really, really growing. And it's because I think it's on the back of their customers. Customers are telling customers, and they are the go-to cloud provider in that part of the world. And they've beaten, big competitors, the Amazons of the world, the Verizons of the world. They beat, Verizon owned in Australia pretty much all the government cyber stuff for a while. And now Macquarie is, more than 50% of the market share in that space. And there's a couple of other minor competitors, but, they've gone up against all the big guns. Telstra was the big dark North Star there, and they beat them without revenue. And you do it on the back of great customer experience.
Yeah, look, I remember about 10 years ago when I was at Pier 1, David had been introduced to me because I'd rolled out MPS at Rackspace, and chatted to him then and worked with them and the team down in Australia, hosted a couple of strategic study trips, which the strategic study trip, is that one of the things you cover in the book?
Oh, yeah. It's coming up later in the book. It's something to look forward to on one of those nights when you're just barely able to read the book before falling asleep.
So, I mean, I've hosted a couple of those for them in the UK, but it's that curiosity that I find often missing. They go, we've got this thing that we've solved, that we can't solve. Let's go find 15 companies. Dom, find us 15 companies in the UK that have solved this problem. We'll fly the team in for 10 days. We'll interview them. And, we've done that a number of times. The storytelling thing, I think, is phenomenal, because it gets consolidated weekly. It gets consolidated to the board. They find the best ones and they have somebody professionally write the story so that it enters the canon of myth and legend in the organization. And when you were saying the competitive thing, I've had the guy who runs one of their customer service teams on the podcast right at the beginning. And this league of legends, if you get 10 tens in a row, you're a legend. And then each month, if you're on the support desk, it's the legends with the longest run of tens in NPS that wins the competition. And so bringing that sort of gamification, which I suppose the salespeople might not think that commission-based sales is gamification, but it is. And bringing that to the support side of the house, just not rocket science really, but it does take dedication. And they've been doing it for 10 years. And they've been getting better at it over 10 years.
Oh, amen. And there's some nuance between, using incentives for sales performance and then creating levels and competitive, strategies and trips. And there's some really wonderful things about the way they do it. So I really do encourage people to read it because I think it will inspire others to think about how can we not go stale in that incentive strategy. But, kudos to you because I do know you were very instrumental in helping them with the NPS. And frankly, it is stellar the way it's done. Going back to the innovation tours, as they call them, or as David likes to call them. David is the CEO. I'm talking about him like he's in the room, but, David Tudehope, one of the founding brothers of this thing, he likes to talk about it as the Noah's Ark tours because they bring like two of everybody from their organization and they make sure it's a diversity when they go out into the field. So if they come to the UK and they study some emerging trend in the UK, they're going to bring people from Australia representing all kinds of departments, sales, marketing, technical, deployment. So they can really pierce through that trend and see if it's relevant. From a country of smaller businesses and shopkeepers, is that going to come and translate well into the Australian market? From the United States, where it might work in big metro centers, will it work, in the context of the Australian market? So they do a brilliant job of getting out of their own kitchen and going and tasting the broth in other kitchens and then determining if that broth is going to sell to what they know very well about their market.
Yeah. And so many of the organizations like theirs that are managed services, data center heavy, most of those businesses, those sort of historic private cloud businesses, have failed to transition into the public cloud world. But as you say, they've done a stellar job, stood up and launched their Azure public cloud business, and are now, they certainly, when I last spoke to them about it, they were outselling any of their public cloud competitors in Australia 3-1. That innovation is just, they managed to, in an industry which typically doesn't innovate very well, that's one of the things that they're very, very good at.
So I talked to a customer of theirs who basically, creates apps for all kinds of different companies, right? And so literally in the server rack over there, in the racks over there at the data centers, they have tons of cell phones just hanging out, like all these cell phones testing these apps. And literally they have several, data centers right across the world where they're doing this to make sure that the apps are functioning and performing the way they're supposed to. But Macquarie was one of the few that said, hey, look, this is a chaotic set of racks here. We've got to create a better way for you to store your cell phones on the rack. And so our people could come in and help if there's any need to troubleshoot something. And so on their own innovation, they created a way to stack these particular phones on the racks. And the client's like, nobody else does that. It's hard enough to have them actually find the phone that's, in default and be able to help us. Often they don't even follow our own policies. And this company is actually creating value by building, a way for them to manage the chaos of what we're trying to deploy on those racks. So I think that's the type of thing you're going to see in this book, that mindset that says, it's not enough just to fulfill the transactional value. We need to think ahead, anticipate those needs. Very, very Ritz-Carlton in that sense, right? Like it's not enough to just meet needs. We need to anticipate the upcoming needs of their clients. And it's been a winning ticket for them. And it should be for all of us. I mean, it's not enough to just do the thing we're hired to do anymore. If you can do that little bit extra, that's the insurance policy against the coupon that your competitor throws at your customer to try to draw them in.
I mean, I use them as an example to prove a point that Fred made to me when he was on the podcast, which was that he said, look, we can show, looking at the data that we've got, that customers will move from one to another, sort of down or maybe up the NPS slope. And the NPS will explain the difference in an NPS delta between two competitors can explain about 85% of customer migrations over time. And it's a bit like, the number one search term on Google, like gets the volume, and you've got to get an NPS in the 80s, right? If it's not world class, it doesn't stand out. There aren't that many people in the 70s or the 60s or the 50s, but it's the 80 consistently at 80, as opposed to, sometimes I'll be working with somebody and they'll say, oh yeah, our goal is to get our NPS from +20 to +30. And you're like, right, okay, are you in an industry where everything is -10? Right? Because otherwise +20 doesn't feel like it might be. It feels like you're trying to get to a score, but actually you're just going from a bit shit to slightly less mediocre, right? And really it being world class is the goal. And like, maybe you can't get it, the whole number for the whole company, for every product, for every customer, but maybe you could start where in your business is it possible to have some sort of light of excellence. And
I love that approach. I mean, I think, you got to start somewhere. And if you can get your organization showing that kind of excellence and then figuring out what you're doing and then apply it to the harder areas to execute, that certainly is the way to go. And it is, Fred obviously knows his stuff in terms of the data. And I think that it does take consistently being at that substantial delta difference to get people to look at the jump. Or they look at where you are and they got to imagine it's just so painful that any jump is not going to send them down, right? Like it's going to be at least flat land to up. And, I think that, there are many companies right now that are just pushing their customers to jump. And then there are other companies that are luring those folks to them. And you want to be in the luring department.
So what else did you like about them? What other stories have you got to tell about Macquarie?
Oh, this is one of those things where you write a whole book, you have to like a lot about them because otherwise you just write a pamphlet.
A postcard tome. Yeah.
It was a good idea until I got in there and there was no there. I think, one of the things for me that is interesting is just how they decide how they go about making decisions within the organization. So, I do think there's a lot of groupthink in the C-suite these days. They have a very high conflict, high energy leadership team that understands in this very distributed model. Again, I assume a lot of facts not in evidence here, but Macquarie is a company that has, 5 heads, if you will, and each business runs as an independent business. They are yoked by very few but aligning metrics. So one of those metrics is NPS. That's one of the metrics that every single business unit, no matter how much autonomy you have, they call it freedom within limits. And the limits are things like the NPS. The limits are, a calculation of revenue. The limits are EBITDA. And so you have to perform with the revenue generation, profit calculations, and you have to have NPS for high performance, and you have to be driving EBITDA. Other than that, you have free reign on your organization, very little shared services, most all decision making in the local. And there's very spirited discussions among those leaders about the overarching course of the business. So if I'm in telecom business and somebody else is in cloud and somebody else is in cyber, even though we're running our own kingdoms and we're measured against these shared metrics, we're having very robust discussion about where are we going to take this organization in terms of the future. And I just don't see that a lot. I see a lot of okie dokie and the meeting after the meeting thing going on in the world. And not so much at Macquarie. You go into those meetings and they're really rapidly discussing, maybe you're in telecom and you're seeing the slide on that and you're having to yield resources to position the brand for the future of cloud. And it is really interesting. So I hope people will read about freedom within boundaries.
Yeah, I've been in some of those sessions, where there's one part of the organization is saying you need to get a grip. You are negatively impacting our ability to hire great, talented people. So what do you plan to do about it? And I also said that I absolutely agree but that team's been together for quite a long time. That's one of the other things is that, forever.
Well, there's a whole story, there's a whole section in the book about talking about these David and Aiden against Goliath was a chapter I wrote in. So David, we mentioned earlier, and his brother Aiden were the founders of the company, and they went up against Telstra, but they've been around for umpteen years. And the point of that story is that if you look at Harvard Business Review or research, founders normally when they go public really are not very valuable after maybe a year or so. I mean, literally they decrease the value of the company because what it takes to run a public company is very different than what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Some people make it. Michael Dell made it. There are a few others, but not a lot make it. They normally need a professional leader who's savvy with dealing with stakeholders, shareholders, for example. So David has been at the helm forever. Aiden has certainly led various parts of the organization forever. And it's intriguing how well they do that and how much they kind of see their role in evolving the organization and themselves evolving. So there's a whole section in here about how do you stay relevant as a leader, particularly through those sizable transitions.
Yeah, well, and Luke, who runs telecom, and James, who runs the cloud business, they can all be, as you say, they're pretty feisty, but they've all been around for a long time.
Analysts said, good luck figuring out who's is going to succeed, these guys, because they're all so good. Like they're really all spectacular and capable of taking the organization. So there wasn't a big fear of a drop off in the future of this brand because not only have they had stable leadership, but the next generation has been around with those people for a long time and have inculcated the essence, the entrepreneur, mindset, if you will, and been able to take it forward. The founder's mindset, I think. Yeah.
I also think that I have unfounded, irrational hatred of shared services. They don't have shared services, as you say. Each of those business units runs itself, has its own HR function, has its own finance leader, although there is obviously somebody pulls it all together. And so is that rare? Most of the other businesses you've looked at, they manage to deliver great customer service with shared services? Or is the shared services, in your opinion, is it like part of if you want to be mediocre, then shared services is the way to go?
Yeah. This is not a simple answer. I mean, I wish I could give you it. Having been somebody who's worked inside.
I'm just going to stick with my irrational hatred then.
I can tell you that I've worked in a shared service in an HR department for a large hospital system, and I understand the benefits and the total nightmare of the thing, right? Often you don't have the power to influence a lot of decisions, even though you are in all these businesses. Everybody in your business is just tolerating you and expecting you to be a service provider to them, but you really can't drive change within their organization. You are more of an outsider, outsourced, hateable object. So I think it is somewhat difficult. And I think, there's accountability is just really the nightmare. You can always blame some other person somewhere else as a shared service provider, or the shared service provider can be, blamed. The beauty of this, I think, is largely accountability, in that you look to Luke or you look to James or you look to whomever, and they are responsible. The buck stops there for their business. It is their business. You can't blame, IT as a problem because you're the one kind of driving your own IT budget. So yeah, I think that's the big advantage, is there's a line of sight accountability and no diffusion. I've seen some really remarkable shared service providers who really can reach across organizations and do great things. So that's why I'm not completely hating them as much as you do, but I think it's harder to effectively hold people accountable.
Those shared services that worked really well, were they an outsourced shared service rather than part of the same team?
Yeah, I think the better ones are. And I think there's a certain point where, you're paying for them and you treat them as not part of the family. They're like the neighbors. So you're a little nicer to them. Yeah, I think there's that we are paying for this. They are experts at it. And yeah, I think that we're successful.
If you had to sum up the culture at Macquarie, how would you sum up their culture?
A high performance culture is a simple answer. Performance matters most, and they've defined customer experience as part of their performance metrics. So we really need to deliver the customer success. These folks are really tracking profitability and EBITDA. It's not as though they're just a touchy-feely. I would even argue that Horst, who I know you're very fond of, and is my mentor of mine from the Ritz-Carlton. I think Horst was probably more of a customer service culture than, say, Macquarie is. But Horst had some challenges sometimes delivering profits because he was so perfect about his service that at times it was so costly that the general managers would say, I want more profit, throw me more profit. And Horst would just very boldly say, I'm going to throw you more customers. We'll figure out profit over time. I'm going to deliver the world's best experience. So I don't see that at Macquarie. They deliver an extraordinary experience, as evidenced by the NPS, but not at the expense of their profits and not at the expense of their company value. It's a trifecta.
It's interesting because for many years, I would say to David, why are you not taking part in the Great Place to Work Awards? Right? Why do you not have any third-party validation for you being a great place to work? And he said, because it's entirely possible to be a great place to work and make no money and deliver crap customer service. And therefore, we're going to focus on the customer service and profitability piece because those two things I think are intrinsically linked. But of course, I did eventually persuade them that I persuaded James that the cloud business should enter the awards and they're best tech company to work for in Australia.
Absolutely. And it was good that you did nudge them because it's important to have that out there too, to attract people. It's one thing to know you've done that other stuff, but you need to have some cred on that too. Over my shoulder is Zappos, which in the United States was it's like a cruise ship for employees. And Tony Hsieh, constantly had to say, like, guys, you have to not only, eat the caviar here, but you got to serve the people, right? Like it was just a reminder that even though we make your life so incredibly fun and playful and, we got all kinds of perks and amenities for you inside of the building, it's got to live outside the building, right? We're not doing this just for your joy and play. We're doing this so that your play will exude into the way you play with guests. And they do a fabulous job there. Don't get me wrong, but you can overdo this. You can create a place that's just like, Disneyland and, they have the nap rooms at Zappos and all the other stuff, but after the nap, you got to go back to work. It's not just a day long party.
And do you having written the books, studied the companies and written them, do you then stay in touch to see how's Zappos doing? You know, they toyed with holacracy, given it up, it seems.
Oh yeah, that was a disaster. Well, you know, they're in a whole different world. Look, I love Tony Hsieh. He died a year and a half, 2 years ago now, in a very tragic way. If you've been tracking his life story, and you know, I actually during the pandemic, I spoke to Tony just right before he died, and he was actually included in the book Stronger Through Adversity, as we were talking about leading through the pandemic. I would say I don't stay very much in touch with Zappos, and not too much with Starbucks either. Just again, when these leaders change, that's when I find myself not engaged anymore. But you know, frequently there are brands like, for example, Prescription for Excellence, which was written about UCLA. While I'm not in touch with UCLA, I stayed in touch with that CEO, and he went to, you know, other large healthcare systems, including the vice president of Google Health. I've stayed in touch with their second in command, who then went on to Stanford and opened One Medical. And I'm writing a book about One Medical next year. One Medical was purchased by Amazon for $4 billion US cash, and they're a technology healthcare provider. So I guess my point is, seldom do I get to stay with the brand itself, but I often follow the leader as they go and do marvelous things in other brands. Follow the leader. It sounds like a kid's game.
Are all of these businesses that you've written about as a result of one person? You know, is Macquarie, you know, is it because the personality profile of David that Macquarie is what it is? Is that it's also true of these other businesses?
I hate to say this, but I think there's a lot more to that than we would want to admit. I mean, obviously, when I'm working with teams and their leader isn't fully on board, I'm saying we got to do all we can, you know, irrespective of the leader, you know, we got to make this great. And, you know, who knows, the leader may change. But I think without a visionary leader in the customer experience strategy space, these things tend to not hold together very well. You know, Mercedes-Benz, it took a leader to take them from 22nd to first. And then he moved on and went and did that, you know, for Mercedes-Benz Stadium and, you know, Arthur Blanc Foundation. So I think you see that leader makes a huge, huge difference. There are turnaround leaders. There are specialists in doing a digital transformation. These service experience transformations tend to have that kind of a leader.
Why don't more leaders get it? You know, because when you write about it, it seems as though these are businesses that turn a smaller amount of sales and marketing dollars into revenue, are better places to work, better places to be a customer. There must be some downside. Is there some downside, or is it?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of downside. First, it's kind of slow to do this. I mean, it is not super, you can't microwave this. So if you need a quick turnaround, I just say cut everything. Like just cut everything. Then you show, you know, you have no expenses. You probably don't have a lot of revenue, but you could get out of town before they realize that. You know, Horst Schulze says it this way, you know, anybody can decrease costs. Very few people can create customer value. You know, they'll come into a hotel, they'll take out the flowers in the entryway because that's cost and there's no value in their perception. So it does take, I think, somebody who's a little more patient and willing to understand that you got to train people, you got to select people, your hiring processes. We didn't even talk about that, but Macquarie has amazing hiring processes, identifying the people who can do this. I mean, this is not everybody can do. You can't just fog mirrors and be customer service focused. You got to be able to really understand what great service looks like. You got to be focused on others. This is not an easy path to go down. And so I think there are easier ways to make a living as a leader. There isn't anything better and more sustainable, more enriching. I think there's not a better legacy to leave as a leader. But, you know, the hard stuff isn't always the way most people go.
Let's dive into that hiring process then. Tell me more about what you found.
Yeah, I think, you know, they've, in the early days, they would do something like, we need to find somebody who's in the top, you know, 5% of their technology class, and we bring those folks in, and no culture fit, no focus on, how hungry are they? How adaptable are they? They make basically now they go to the universities and they say, look, we're going to hire you for a short window, like 2 years. And that's it. You're going to get a 2-year contract. After which you can go on holiday to the UK. You can do whatever you want to do. But you're going to have a 2-year commitment. It's going to be hard work. Well, right there is enough to scare most university graduates right out of those shoes. It's not going to be easy, and because we're going to require you to get certified, and every 6 months you're going to go through another level of certification. And if you're not progressing, that's going to be a problem for you. And, but we're here to provide all the payment for all the certifications. And, oh, by the way, let me understand a bunch of stuff about what you think about service, and does your family come to you when they have a problem, or do they go to somebody else when they have a technology problem because you make them feel stupid? I mean, all of it. They just put you through lots of stuff. And then when they find that you've got the right personality characteristics, that service gene, and you've got a really hard work, high performance gene, you care about certifications, you're willing to forego immediate gratification, you're not going to have a great balanced lifestyle for 2 years. You're going to be your university education was just foundational. This is where you're really going to get your chops. If you're willing to do all that, you're going to walk out in 2 years with certification. We guarantee you a pathway to the next level of the of your career. We've got it all mapped out. You can see it, visually. You hit that at 2 years. Here's 3 different pathways you can take, and here's all the levels and certifications. You can go from there. And it's a different value proposition. And I think, I talk to them. It is hard to attract these people, with that pitch, but the people you attract are the right ones.
Well, and I can't remember the guy's name, but I mean, what had happened was they used to outsource their support, and it was done by, I think, a firm in Hong Kong. And to make sure that they were getting value for money, they set up a team internally to pitch for it. And there was no intention at the time to bring service back on board onshore. But this was right at the beginning of the sort of MPS journey. And then the internal team won the pitch. And it's like, well, now we need to hire people. And they're in the central business district of, in Sydney. So, like with any big capital city, it's tough to attract people. And, their reputation as a telco doesn't sound like they're a leading edge technology business. And so that going into universities and going back, instead of hiring people in the milk round at the end of the 3rd year when they've graduated, hiring them at the 2nd year was just, and then saying, look, it's a part-time job. So you're going to do university part-time. You're going to work for us for 20 hours a week. That got them a talent pool that they could afford to compete with the people, the outsource offering in Hong Kong. It takes effort to come up with a solution like that. Or to say, let's have an internal team to pitch to make sure that we're getting value from our external providers and then allow them to win.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many messages in there. I mean, the onshoring alone, just this awareness. And again, I think that could have been a nudge from you. The awareness, you really are creating a different value proposition if you onshore at much higher cost. So you better be able to show from a performance perspective that that's going to work out for you in the end. And they did. I mean, most companies, again, we talked about it earlier, they go the shortcut, right? The cheaper way, not the value creating way and not the loyalty building way. They give up all that easy revenue that comes from people who repeat business and or refer colleagues. They give all that up because they're chasing the new acquisition with the cheap money.
Yes. Well, and without having solved the problem, which is we could actually probably do it with fewer, better people. If you've got, you talked about, you have to have people with a service DNA, right? So it's a McKinsey study. I know it's of executives, but look, at the executives, if their job gets them in flow, they're 500% more productive. There's loads of, the right person in the right job, 5 to 10 times more productive. You're not paying them 5 to 10 times more money. You might not even be paying them a cent more. Then you've got a high performing team, and that high performing team of 6 beats a low performing team of 8 all day long. Easier to manage, better consistency.
I'm just having a little trauma right now because it seems like most books I write about the book flow And then I have to do the audiobook, and then I have to pronounce the name of the author and that Michelli guy. I mean, so anytime I hear the word flow, I just freeze up for a minute. Your point's well taken. I mean, this idea that a lot of cheap people is better than a few more costly people befuddles me, but it certainly seems to predominate in a lot of sectors nowadays. Let's just get anybody we can, and then let's pay the cost of that in ways that are invisible.
It's because they're taking your early comment very literally. Let's just cut everything.
Yeah. The cheaper the better. The cheaper the better, but let's sell to our customers that we're really quality.
Yeah, totally. Let's not. Let's hope they don't spot our margin and want some of it.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. And the thing about David and Aidan, I think, is they've done some very contrarian things. I think they often take a view that's much more cynical of the traditional. Like, they are rebels. The book is called Customer Magic with an Intention, right? Carol Moseley Braun, who was a U.S. congressman, once said that magic is to challenge the seemingly impossible. And I think that's been the attitude of the founders of Macquarie from the beginning. Like, is this really impossible? Is what people say is the tried and true route the best way, really? It's almost always the way David goes about things. I mean, when we're publishing the book, why can't we use more digital and audio assets as a launch point? Why must we do it in the traditional publishing way? I mean, everything about him questions whether or not it must be done the way it has always been done. And I think that's led them to a space in the technology world that's just very different. He thinks like a hotelier in some ways, like he is a hospitality thinker in the technology space, and he's making money.
And he's transitioned from legacy business to cloud business, and from telco into hosting, and then hosting into public hosting.
All the better. He has multiple revenue streams, and he's proportioned out. They keep proportioning based on the market. Right. So they lean into things based on where the market's going, but they have themselves well positioned, and each of those things build on each other. I get a medium-sized B2B client in on the telephone needs, and the next thing you know, I'm dealing with their technology needs. And as they grow and burgeon their, the cloud needs, and oh my gosh, it's just been it's a very smart play. They can bring you in on many different levels, and they have a robust set of offerings as you grow and evolve.
Fab. Joseph, I'm going to ask you again. I can't remember what you said the last time. You might not remember either. What is it you know now you wish you'd known earlier?
Well, I know you. I wish I'd known you earlier. I'm sure that was not my answer the last time.
It wasn't there, but that serves me. That serves me right. So, what have you been reading that other people should pick up? So, other than Customer Magic, not available yet in the UK. If, like me, you're keen.
Okay, sorry. You wanted to know, so here it is. It's Think Like a Horse. So you got to check that out. I got to put my headphones back in now that I did all that running. That's all the exercise I'm going to do today right there. But Think Like a Horse. And it's lessons in life, leadership, and empathy from an unconventional cowboy. I would think you would find value in this, fellow farmer.
Have you got anything else? What else? You must be.
That's it. That's all I'm reading right now. I mean, I am writing another book. So this is such a blessing. And I've got another, like next week, I'm going to be interviewing somebody else who I've worked with in the past about possibly doing a book. So I find myself trying to read other stuff, but mostly I'm out there engaging people in the world, trying to figure out how to tell their stories.
Give me a synopsis then of Think Like a Horse. Why'd you pick it up? Why are you liking it?
I think because, first off, in general, during the pandemic, I wrote a business principle, which, really talked about lead from the front, middle, and back, right? Because horses, if you look at a horse herd, wild horse herds, there is an alpha horse that is, driving the herd, and there's another horse in the back that is kind of keeping the herd, from going too slow. And there are horses within the team that shape the herd so they don't get too far out. So you literally have designated roles of horses. So somebody's going to be the visionary leader. Somebody's going to be the kind of push from behind. The others are going to be the shapers. And so as leaders in organizations, we frequently have to be all those things. And sometimes we get stuck in one role, like we're too much out there. Hey, let's take the hill, everybody. And, it's really important sometimes to let the herd run and just make sure they're moving at the right pace. And sometimes you have to just get in, roll up your sleeves and say, I'm doing it with you and we're all in this together. And so I think learning from the nature, and people who interact with nature frequently help us understand human nature, and or ways we can apply principles of nature to humans.
Well, that's
more than you wanted to know about horses, for sure.
No, that's great. I'm going to go and have a look. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting to you again.
'Twas my pleasure, sir. Thank you.